You're listening to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. I'm your host, Gregory Heller, from the MBA Career Management Office at the Foster School of Business at the University of Washington. This season, I'll be joined by co-host Jonathan Azoff, the co-founder and general partner of Snowcap, a venture capital firm investing in deep tech climate solutions in our global supply chains, for a series we're calling Conversations on Careers in Climate Tech. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks, Gregory. Over the course of this season, we'll talk to entrepreneurs across climate tech and sustainability about their careers and the career opportunities for job seekers looking to impact one of the greatest challenges facing humanity. We'll break each conversation into 2 episodes, the first focusing on our guest's business, how it came to be, who their customers are, and what kind of impact they hope to have.
And the second will focus on the advice our guest has for job seekers looking to make a pivot into this space. This season is made possible with funding from Snowcap. You can learn more about their fund and portfolio of investments at snocap.vc. In this episode, we share the first part of our conversation with Josh Mastromatto, the founder of Rego, a startup with a novel solution to an all-too-common problem. We've all probably had the experience, and I know I see it in the neighborhoods around campus, of trying to get rid of a large piece of furniture when making a move. Rego aims to tackle this waste problem and divert these items from landfills.
As a first-time founder, Josh overcame numerous challenges in building his business, from pivoting from a more traditional waste hauler to a tech-enabled solution to raising funds as a sustainability startup.
We're interested to hear about Josh's experience and the lessons he's learned along the way. In part 2 of the conversation, we'll hear his advice for job seekers and career changers looking to break into the climate tech space.
Josh's journey is one that many of our listeners may find relatable, and we're excited to dig into the insights he's gained throughout the process.
We hope you enjoy this conversation on careers in climate tech with Josh Mastromatto from Rego. Josh, welcome to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd love for you to go into just a little bit more detail about what Rego does, who's your customer, and what's the value that you really seek to bring.
Yeah, so we really serve large apartment buildings in big cities, primarily around move-out season. So you have this challenge where these, high rises have a lot of people moving in and out at very specific times throughout the year, which as a byproduct generates a lot of waste that's typically hard to deal with. So, the easiest example here is a couch, but with these buildings, they might have 50 couches. So what we do is come in, essentially eliminate that headache for property staff while driving down hauling costs for tenants who are moving out and aren't taking that stuff with them. And then in the back end, what we do is find sustainable destinations for these items like nonprofits or recycling centers, and then efficiently, route them to those areas instead of landfills and track the waste diversion benefit, so that the building and then also the tenants in the building can benefit from some of the environmental outcomes on the back end.
Before that couch ends up on the curb waiting for Rego to pick it up, do you know that it's coming there?
Coming to
the curb, yeah. Like, does the property owner send a message out to tenants and say, "Hey, can you fill out this form and say what large furniture you plan to get rid of and not take with you?"
Yeah, good question. So the way that it works is pretty cool. So we'll integrate with the building's technology services so that we're right there anytime a tenant needs us. So you could almost think of us like an amenity, and then all the tenant has to do is take a photo. And then based on the photo, it spits back a price, and then they can select a date if they agree to that price, similar to like a standard junk scheduling, except boiled down to, one step instead of a phone call and several other moving pieces. And then in the back end, we have a computer vision model that identifies we'll call it couch for simplicity, that identifies the couch. And then based on a number of different factors, that model will identify where that couch should go, obviously with the aim of keeping it out of a landfill. So yeah, everything is sort of like, promoted by the building itself to the tenants who will ultimately use us. And, it's easy, affordable, and practical for them to use.
And the tenant ends up paying.
It can be the tenant. It can also be the building. So we're working on a few different pricing strategies as we scale into new markets. Right now, we're in the process of actually going from Philadelphia into Atlanta. And so there are some, pricing strategies we're looking at with building owners directly, where they can include us more like a true amenity. And then some buildings will simply have the tenants pay for it. And then it just makes sense for tenants because it's so much more affordable than calling a junk company themselves.
Josh, now I'm
Mhm.
fortunate to know the answer, or at least partially the answer to this, but I'd love for you, if you wouldn't mind, to just kind of go into a little bit more of how you got to this point. Like how did this whole idea even start for you?
Yeah, so I'll focus on really the waste diversion component of it. John, I know you know this. I moved 8 times in like a 10-year time period, so I was very familiar with the problem of what do I do with this stuff when I move. Initially, I just thought I wasn't that good at it and assumed that everybody else had some magic bullet in the back end. But when I moved to Philadelphia, I was working at a startup and I was leading their community outreach division. And so I started running local neighborhood street cleanups. And we did that for a few years and, grew a lot of popularity, meaning like a lot of people would come out. I think by the second year we had like 35 volunteers coming out and we were cleaning up like close to 70 contractor bags of trash off the street. And we just kept noticing this pattern of furniture dumped all over the city. Like we could go to a bridge somewhere to clean up and there'd be, a couch, a mattress, and a table. We could go to somewhere in Center City. It would be even more furniture dumped on the side of the road. And then really like the bigger pain point during those street cleanings that really sparked the curiosity was once we got it to a point where we would get the trash in bags and then collect the furniture and throw it on the truck. We would go to the transfer station or the landfill ran by the city, where they actually didn't take the trash from us. Like we got so big in that second year that they wouldn't take the trash from us. And so that just sparked like this outrage in me of like, hey, why is this problem even happening? What's like leading to this? And then as I dug into it more and more, I realized that there were thousands and thousands of people across Philadelphia, and then 10x that across the country, who are running into that same exact problem that I ran into when moving. They don't know what to do with their stuff, and so their best resort was either the curb or some junk company that was taking it and didn't want to pay landfill fees and dump the stuff on the side of the road. So that's really what sparked the initial push to create this.
You're competing with the curb. Um, I think living in cities too, we kind of get used to seeing that, just stuff outside. And would you attribute a lot of that behavior to this sort of lack of access to this sort of tool?
Lack of access, lack of education, and historically we operated in really one way, right? Because you know we were told, oh, just leave that outside and the trash company will come take it and it's no problem. We didn't think about it that much. We didn't think about the way that like a chair fits into sustainability or landfill challenges. But really what we noticed was an interesting like inflection point that we had hit in the US in particular, where the amount of furniture that was getting thrown out, like if you tracked it back according to EPA statistics from like the 1960s, the amount of furniture getting thrown out had increased by almost 500%. There was this massive spike,
Whoa.
and it went pretty in line with the rise of moving rates across the US as well. So it was like you could pinpoint a lot of the similar challenges. And then the way that was initially, I don't know if combated is the right word, but the way that we tried to combat that problem, or the initial solutions were to build cheaper furniture, so that way it was similar to fashion, where you had furniture that was only going to be with you for a short period of time, and it was affordable enough where you could essentially buy it every time you moved and not have to worry about moving that furniture with you, because moving companies got very expensive for a number of reasons. And then what we weren't aware of, and we again as a society, is all the waste that was going to generate. Yeah, I think it's a combination of that the lack of education, the lack of resources, and also lack of timing, right? Like the average customer we serve right now has more than 3 pieces of furniture in less than 4 days to move. So that's just a chaotic situation to have on top of everything else you need to take care of when you're moving, or even buying new furniture.
I think one of the other things that's interesting is there are more ways than ever also to try and sell your
Yeah.
things or to give them away, whether that's on Marketplace or OfferUp or Craigslist. But these, as you said, the challenge is you don't have a lot of time.
Mhm.
And at the end, you really just have to get out. So it seems like, most people's option is put it on the curb and hope someone sees the
The
value
curb.
in it before the trash company comes and they take it away, and like someone takes it away and it's like curb find. I'm reminded there was like a Volkswagen commercial where these two guys are driving around, they find a chair and they put it in the car, and then they drive around, and then you see them take it out of the car because the chair
Mhm.
was not worth taking home for some reasons. Um,
Yeah.
so you have this idea, right? You've
Mhm.
seen this problem, you have this idea. What are some of the challenges that you faced as a first-time founder? I mean, you said you were working for a startup, but this is the first startup you founded. What were some of the challenges that you faced in getting this off the ground?
Yeah. I mean, they're never-ending challenges, I would say. Like you pass one challenge and there's completely new sets of challenges that you face. What's interesting for us is that we didn't initially start as a startup. The initial goal was, hey, we were going to be more of an evolution of a junk removal service where we were going to get a truck, a warehouse, and we were going to have, a better technology enabled upload process, for lack of better terms. You could probably tell I'm not the technical co-founder on the team, but we felt like, hey, what we could really do is give people just a better way to sell, donate, or responsibly dispose of their furniture when they were moving, and we'd be like this evolution. And then we just kept noticing patterns throughout that period. Like we had at that point we were up and running. We did that for a little over a year and spoke to hundreds of people in real time, like face to face, and we just kept noticing patterns amongst people who were moving and running into this problem. And so we actually realized that there was a bigger opportunity to solve this problem by being a technology platform and marketplace rather than trying to do everything ourselves. So there was this huge friction point we had to get past going into 2022 to transition from this localized sort of junk service to this technology platform that was almost like starting all over again and coming with a completely new set of problems to solve versus what we were doing again on the local level.
So I assume you needed funding to make that pivot. Like, maybe did you bootstrap the initial iteration of the sort of evolved junk service, and then you needed funding to build the new tech platform?
That's right. That's right. So my co-founder and I had talked a lot about this, about whether or not it made sense to make the transition into the marketplace because of what you just described. There's, a big funding deficiency that comes into place when you're looking to do that. Whereas, if you're more of a traditional service, and I don't say that lightly, but you can generate cash flow pretty immediately. And then, you can much much more clearly map out your path to like profitability based on a number of factors. So yeah, there was that inherent deficiency and challenge that we were looking at, and that's where Techstars came into the picture. So we had started mapping out what this would look like if it was a technology platform or marketplace. And the way that we pitched Techstars was we actually just drew it on a piece of paper. We used like PowerPoint, created like one slide of what it would look like if we built it, and then just kind of like drew notes and pitched it on video like that. Fortunately, they liked it and said, hey, we want to be the organization that helps you make that transition to build this. So that was where we got the initial funding to build the product, run our early testing, and then get it back into the market.
You want to talk a little bit more about the experience with Techstars?
Yeah, I can talk about Techstars and Generator because both were transformational for us to make this transition. Because one thing I want to stress is we had built a lot of really good relationships while being like that local service with nonprofits, customers, and whoever. So it was really critical that we made the transition as quickly as possible to keep those relationships and not have to go through some major relaunch or anything like that. So the accelerators provided us that framework to make that transition as smooth as possible. It was not smooth, but make it as smooth as possible and help us navigate like, how to essentially transition the customer base as well. Not that we had this recurring service that people were coming back to, but we, almost overnight had to completely flip the website and generate a new like end user experience, which again is much different if you can control the process where you're going to show up to their house with a truck and maybe smooth over anything that didn't make sense on the website. So yeah, Techstars was like that day one support that we needed, day one funding. that, friendly atmosphere where you can like test things and ask these open-ended questions that, maybe you couldn't ask like a traditional investor. It was almost like a safe space to restart. So that's where Techstars was great for us. And then Generator came in a few months later, and that was, in my opinion, an invaluable experience. Not only do we meet awesome people like John, I don't say that lightly, although it always sounds goofy on a podcast, but Generator was perfect because we already had a product in market. We had started identifying patterns, bringing us into the multifamily space. And Generator was almost like a sales accelerator. It was different than your day one experience that Techstars provided. It was more of like, hey, you already have a product in market. You're really now just trying to iterate as quickly as possible to product market fit, drive new revenue, and look to like expand into new territories if appropriate. So two different experiences that both came at really critical times for us, and both invaluable experiences.
And you were one of the first like sustainability cohorts for Generator. They had just broken into sustainability. That's how I found out about them, at least, which I think is awesome. To kind of, I think back to like the earliest, YC cohorts and things like that. Like there's going to be hopefully many more, and to be there like on the ground floor is pretty sweet, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Generator is incredible. Like they, as an organization, have come a really long way. But to your point, the sustainability cohorts were very new, and their first cohort had a lot of success. I mean, we were following the footsteps of giants in those companies,
Yeah.
and I again don't say that lightly. Very high success rate of those companies securing follow-on funding after that cohort. So there was a lot of pressure, and I will be forever grateful to Generator and Ryan in particular. Is that really before Generator, nobody in the climate space or sustainability space would give us, credit, right? They essentially like knocked us for saying that we were a sustainability or, climate focused company. Like that really didn't, change until Generator put their stamp on us, and then helped us navigate like how to talk about it in the right ways, and how to like calculate emissions and things like that. So yeah, I'll be forever grateful because that completely changed the trajectory of the business and put us or helped us get into the climate category, and really get our work like approved by a lot of people in the climate and sustainability space.
Yeah. Market validation. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So you're now a sustainability startup, right? And you're raising, and you're in Philly too, which is not, let's just call it out. It's not known for being necessarily the foremost place to raise. Yet, you've somehow done it. You've tapped into whatever the mind share is in Philly, and I'm sure I won't steal your thunder, but I think you've had a lot of success there, at least more than I'm used to seeing in that town. So can you maybe talk a little bit about what it's been like specifically being in Philly and raising, as a sustainability startup?
Yeah, and I'll knock on wood here because we're still going through a lot of due diligence. So I will hopefully be able to more formally announce it pretty soon. But yeah, I mean, Philly is a challenging market for many reasons, but it's just a tough city, right? Like that is the blood of the city is like toughness. So on one hand, it's been incredible because it helps build that resiliency of hearing no a lot and hearing really harsh criticism. But I think at the end of the day, what I realized after, talking with a lot of these people who had told us no, I can't even count how many times, is a lot of that, criticism, feedback, no, what have you, is coming from a really good place where they're trying to tell you as bluntly as possible what you need to hear to make those transitions. And so, yeah, Philly's more known for like your life sciences, your biotech, your pharma startups. They call it Silicon Valley. It's like this stretch from West Philly up through this area called Fishtown. So a lot of it too boiled down to like, getting really good advice on how the business should operate and what economics should look like, but then also understanding we may not be talking to the right investors for the business. And then that's where we started to look outside of Philadelphia to, do our raise and help kickstart the process, before we went back to some of the folks that had told us no early on in the Philadelphia area to show them all the progress we had made from some of those early conversations. And then that's really what ended up moving the needle for them. It was, the resiliency of us to keep going, show that we could make it work for something that they said was absolutely crazy and not going to work at all. But then also it was enough time to show like, hey, we actually listened to your feedback. Although you were focused on this other area, your point about unit economics or customer discovery made a lot of sense. And we we implemented that in our business and it worked. So that's what really helped in the Philadelphia market.
I love it.
So, Josh, you mentioned how you learn to talk about the environmental impact of the work that you do. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, how you sort of quantify that impact and how you made the pivot into legitimately being a startup that is focused on sustainability.
Yeah, great questions, because in the early days what we were doing too much was like, almost making too big of a leap into what we wanted to do in the future, where it sounded like, you know, guys that were just overly ambitious or maybe trying to sell a story, right? I guess greenwashing is like the more common term. And what I mean by that is we have this really long-term crazy vision where you can connect this very fragmented recycling system in the US. You could say the same about like furniture manufacturers or that in the entire side of the industry. But being able to connect that very fragmented industry in order to make furniture recycling a reality. It's very challenging right now because if you look at a couch, there's all these different materials. Or if you look at maybe something that comes from a place like, an IKEA, you might not know firsthand it's an IKEA table, even if it's made up of particle board. You may not know it because maybe the tag's not there. So then you don't necessarily know, okay, what is definitely in this table that should dictate whether or not it can go to a recycling center that can process, particle board or plywood versus like, simply a landfill. And so that's really like one of our biggest long-term visions, is to be able to connect that marketplace and identify things that are coming onto our marketplace through the computer vision model, and then be able to put them into the right logistics and recycling routes to get to those destinations that can handle those materials, and then work with the manufacturers and recyclers, from a very high level to also build out that framework. Because again, it's going to look very different for a couch than it is, a table that's made completely of particle board. I mean, even talking about that right now still seems like, whoa, crazy, daunting, challenging. Like, how are you going to figure out all those moving pieces? And so what was important for us, and this was actually something John helped us with a lot, was breaking out that roadmap into chunks to say, okay, what we're doing today is just trying to simply keep as many things out of a landfill as possible. So that looks like, if there's a couch that's usable, what local donation center can we get that to? And how can we do it in a way that makes sense economically for us, for the customer, for the apartment building, and for the hauler? Okay, much more digestible. But now once it gets there, can we put legitimate math behind kg CO2e avoidance from landfills? So if you say, okay, if this gets to a nonprofit, can we make an estimation of what we saved from the landfill, again, for kg CO2e, then also weight, like, how much does the couch actually weigh? And then can we make an accurate or somewhat accurate or justifiable prediction for how long that couch will stay out of a landfill or what may happen to it next? Because I think in the early days, or what a lot of junk companies get knocked for like donation, is that, you may just be kicking the problem down the road a little bit, because, the easy argument as well, eventually that couch has to go to the landfill if it gets trashed at the next place. So then we were able to really build out the framework to, provide justifiable, or like, I don't know what the right word is here, but like, build out a framework that people could grasp and say, okay, hey, I like this. This is a really good starting point. What does the next step look like? What is the next evolution here? And that's when we could start talking about those higher level, loftier goals, and how like collecting this data now at an early stage and building out this framework ties into this much larger, recycling and reuse initiative that's nationwide and has all these complicated logistics components and complicated moving pieces with manufacturers and suppliers, or I'm sorry, recycling centers. I know I kind of like rambled a little bit there, so I'm just going to take a pause to see if that made sense.
Yeah, I want to make one thing clear.
Uh-huh.
You talked about the haulers.
Yeah,
So you're now a platform where you're essentially connecting haulers with the job of hauling something. You're telling them where to pick it up and where to drop it off.
correct.
So you're saying, like, go to Main Street, find this apartment building, pick up these 3 couches, bring them to the thrift store on, South Main Street, and they're ready to accept it, and everything should be.
Correct.
And Josh, there's and now I'm thinking back to my experience of moving. I know that when I was moving apartments, it was kind of at the heyday of the Grubhubs and the Ubers and all these
Hmm.
sort of like car through your phone type apps. And I remember there were companies like Lug, I think was a big one,
Hmm.
that are like this sort of tech-enabled haulers, but they lack this sort of intelligence layer, I guess, that you're creating around impact. Have you ever thought about like your mix of haulers and integrations and how you would maybe pick and choose what haulers to work with in what city?
Yeah, that's a good question, and they're good companies to look at too because I mean they kind of like paved the way for companies like us to then come into the market and exist. And there's a lot of overlap down the road of like where we could work together and things like that. But I mean, they solved a really big problem early on, and I think Lug recently announced that they did their 1 millionth lug or something like that. So there's a lot of like learning lessons to be taken from those companies that kind of jumped in to be the Uber for couch model and things like that. But what we realize is speed is very expensive, right? So when you talk about the intelligence layer, it's like, well, what is the utility of the intelligence? And you can get into some really creative prediction modeling, routing that help you combat against how much it costs essentially to try to compete on speed. So that's where we wanted to really differentiate ourselves in the market and not get into the game of like, hey, we're going to get there right now the second you need us, and really focus more on solving a true pain point inside of an apartment building or maybe even a commercial space that's like turning office tenants over, and then really focus on the uniqueness of the waste diversion and the benefit for the haulers, because there's a whole different category there of how our platform benefits haulers compared to some other marketplaces. But that's really where we were able to like differentiate ourselves and then layer on some of that intelligence to make the business and unit economics work, and then make it more of a scalable, repeatable model across apartment buildings.
Can you speak to that some more? Like where the haulers? Yeah, I feel like that's not a point to brush over. Right? Like,
Mhm.
and it can get lost in this. Is like why would haulers work with Rego over any other service?
Yeah. So let's talk about like your local hauler, right? Like, and not necessarily somebody with a pickup truck, but maybe a small business. It might be a crew of 3 to 5 guys
College
in a
hunks
city.
hauling junk.
Well, College Hunks is deceivingly big. I believe they're doing close to like 250 million a year in
Oh wow.
revenue. Very sneaky. So there's a lot of money in junk removal that goes unnoticed in the VC landscape for sure.
Do they
I think
screen
one
for hunkiness? Is that part of the criteria for working?
that's a great question. That's a great question. Um, but I get excited by that because I look at a lot of those junk companies as potential partnerships rather than competition. Because I think to your point, John, like we bring a layer of intelligence and technology that helps the market rise rather than competing directly against the market, because those companies are so big. I think they can, we can come in, I should say, and really help them have a massive environmental impact, but also bring to them a very compelling revenue opportunity. But in the short term, if we look at like your local business, there's a lot of junk removal companies across the US. There's no shortage of them. It's a low barrier to entry. And so then customer acquisition cost becomes very high and lifetime value becomes very low. So it's really hard for these localized, hauling companies to try to compete against the 1-800s, the college hunks, and those companies. So then they look to marketplaces. Now, this could be like a lead generation service, like your Angie's or Thumbtacks, or it could be like more of a like marketplace for hauling. And so the challenge there is, again, they're competing on cost, right? So they might get sent on jobs that take them halfway across the city to pick up one thing, where they then need to go to a landfill that's on the other side of the city, and they get into this game where they're really just taking jobs on these marketplaces so that they can keep themselves afloat, and they're not necessarily ever getting out of that phase, and then it benefits the marketplace and not the haulers. So what we were really intentional about, especially having driven the truck ourselves for well over a year, and developing relationships with all these haulers, was building out a system that helped these haulers actually make money on the platform without spending money on acquisition costs. and then being able to, operate within their workday. And I could go down a lot of different rabbit holes there, but really like driving a lot of value for them and how they operate their workday, how they make money, how they can avoid landfill tipping fees themselves, and then how they can get consistent business from us, so that it's really like a winning opportunity for them. So again, a lot of different like directions you could go for that, but that was one of the biggest things for us was like building out a really compelling opportunity for local hauling companies to earn revenue and grow their business with us, rather than simply joining us to stay afloat or anything like that.
Couple quick questions, just
Mhm.
because I love getting into the details
Yeah.
on how companies work. Do you offer like routing and scheduling? So, 5 different people say, hey, we've got a couch, a table, 4 chairs, whatever, and it's all in this area of the city or these 3 buildings. And you find the closest hauling partner and you say to those 5 people, hey, this is the time that, the hauler is going to show up, so that the hauler is filling their truck as much as possible to make one trip rather than 5 trips back to the same building.
Yeah. And that's a lot where our intelligence layer comes in, because what's happening in the back end, and I have to give my co-founder credit for this because he really built it, is the ability to automate that routing based on like the actual items usability and material composition. That really kicks off a lot of the process for us. And then it also helps us build like this really like unique prediction model of essentially knowing when people will need us before they know it. And so that way we're, to your point, batching all of these pickups together in one shot that makes sense for the hauler instead of sending them in a bunch of different directions throughout the city. It makes a lot more sense if they can go to 1 or 2 buildings that are in the same area, pick up a lot of things, and then have like 2 to 3 very specific destinations to drop that stuff off at.
So you mentioned that you're getting ready to move into Atlanta. I guess my question is,
Mhm.
as a platform, what slows down your expansion into other markets? Because we could use you here in Seattle. I'll tell you, if you could get to Seattle by May, June of 2024, I could point you to a couple buildings that are going to be full of stuff on the UW
Yep.
campus or nearby.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to get there. Um, really, in the short term, just because we've been so early, it was a lot of just proving out the concept in Philadelphia, and then being able to get investors excited to inject us with the capital we need to then scale into new markets with that repeatable process. You have some of that natural friction with onboarding new haulers in a market, and then even new buildings. But we found a way to do it in a really fast turnaround time so that we can open into new markets quickly. I think historically you always saw franchise models because it's hard to open in new markets, and that's how junk removal companies did it. But since we're really the tech and intelligence layer, it allows us to expand somewhere much faster than some of the traditional models. So yeah, it's some of that initial friction with getting the haulers on board, again, which we found creative ways to bypass and make it faster. So hopefully we'll be in Seattle a lot sooner than we would have initially expected starting this a few years ago.
Love it. Love it. Yes. Well, maybe turning it around instead of, advocating that you show up in Seattle this summer. Maybe you can tell us what the future goals are. Like, what are the long-term goals for Rego? How do you envision its role in our sustainability efforts domestically, internationally? How are you seeing this kind of play out?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds crazy. I want us to be in every apartment building in every city. Like in order for us to really have that impact that we're looking for, we need to be in every major city, right? It's going to hit that inflection point where you won't see couches outside on the curb anymore because Rego does that. It's just going to be that natural, like, oh yeah, there we have a company called Rego that does that. I look at companies like Fetch, for example, that completely changed the package game for apartments. And it's like, oh yeah, we every not every building, but close to every building has Fetch, right? That was like this 10-year overnight success and mindset shift for people. Same thing with Uber and taxis. I know that's a low hanging fruit analogy to make, but I really see us being that catalyst for sustainability in this space. And I know in order to have that type of impact, you need to be in all the major cities. all the major apartment buildings. And then that's where we can really start to work on our longer term circular economy goals of working with the manufacturers, the suppliers, the recycling centers to figure out better solutions to reinsert materials back into manufacturing processes, making sure they're getting to the right recycling plants to have that bigger impact rather than just keeping something out of the landfill in the short term.
This has been so interesting to hear about the growth of the company, the impact that you're having, and the direction that you're hoping to go. I think this is probably a good point to shift into a little bit more of your advice for people who want to move into the sustainability space. And we'll hear that in part 2 of our conversation with Josh. Josh's experience as a first-time founder in the climate tech space really highlights the challenges and opportunities that come with building a startup in this field. His advice on the importance of resilience and learning from criticism and feedback is particularly valuable.
Definitely. Josh's insights on the benefits of participating in accelerator programs like Techstars and Generator, not just for funding, but also for mentorship and validation, are crucial for anyone considering launching a startup in this space. I also found his perspective on the challenges of fundraising as a sustainability startup in a city like Philadelphia really eye-opening. His advice on looking beyond your local market and leveraging progress to win over skeptical investors is practical and actionable.
For job seekers and career changers, Josh emphasizes the importance of persistence, adaptability, and a willingness to learn from feedback. His own journey from athlete to founder is a great example of how transferable skills and a strong work ethic can help you succeed in the climate tech industry. We hope you enjoyed part 1 of our conversation on careers in climate tech with Josh Mastromatto. Check out part 2 in the podcast feed or at conversationsoncareers.com. Thank you for listening to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or classmate. Help others find the show by leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Conversations on Careers and Professional Life is produced by me, Gregory Heller, with support from the Foster School of Business Office of MBA Career Management. Learn more about the show, find show notes, and past episodes, and get in touch with me at conversationsoncareers.com. This episode was produced with editing and engineering support from Amelia Nguyen, a student in the Communication Leadership Master's Program at the University of Washington, and made possible in part with funding from Snowcap, a venture capital firm investing in early-stage platforms that directly and indirectly solve the climate crisis. Learn more at snowcap.vc. That's SNOCAP.vc.